Welcome back to Mind Polish. In 2022, facing rising food prices, Egyptian President Abdul Fattah el-Sisi suggested that Egyptians could resort to eating tree leaves, as the Prophet Muhammad did while in siege near Mecca for 3 years. This comment, though seemingly in jest, underscores the severe economic challenges in Egypt. Fast forward to 2024, and the nation is besieged not by biblical plagues of cattle, locusts, or blood-red Nile waters, but by a series of dire geopolitical, economic, and social crises. These modern plagues are pushing Egypt towards a tipping point. President el-Sisi's attempts to manage the situation are becoming increasingly reminiscent of the failed strategies of his ousted predecessor, Hosni Mubarak. If you're new to this channel, consider subscribing for more insightful content like this. Now, let's delve into Egypt's modern plagues. Welcome to the 2020s. No exploration of Egypt can begin without acknowledging its incredibly rich history. The remnants of ancient Egyptian civilization are still prominently visible, with the breathtaking pyramids in the heart of Cairo standing as testament. Throughout history, Romans, Greeks, Arabs, Fatimids, Ottomans, French, and British have all vied for control of the vital Nile Delta region, a civilization hub for at least 6,000 years. One significant conquest was the Arab campaign of 641 AD, which brought Islamization and Arabization to Egypt, an influence that is present to this day. The lifeblood of Egypt has always been the Nile. Covering an area of 1 million square kilometers, nearly all of Egypt's population resides in the Nile Valley and Delta, despite these riverine areas making up only about 4% of the country's total area. The remaining 96% is desert, meaning the effective habitable land area is just 40,000 square kilometers. With a population of 114 million, Egypt's actual population density is among the highest in the world, making it one of the most densely populated areas globally. In terms of total land area, Egypt does not rank high in population density. However, when considering habitable land, Egyptians live in one of the most crowded areas in the world, excluding small city-states. With a density of 2,850 people per square kilometer, it is twice that of Bangladesh and over 3 times that of Palestine before the Gaza massacres. Over the past 50 years, Egypt has seen uncontrolled population growth. From 38 million in 1975, its population has tripled to 114 million today. For most of the 20th century, Egypt's fertility rate exceeded 4, sometimes even 5 children per woman, peaking at a staggering 7 children. Though it has slowed in recent years, it remains at 3 children per woman, indicating continued population growth. At this rate, Egypt's population could reach 150 million in another 25 years. While such a fertility rate is the aspiration of many developed countries striving to improve demographics, it poses significant challenges for countries like Egypt. People desire dignity, basic living conditions, good jobs, education, healthcare, and a future for themselves and their children. However, Egypt's physical geography and economic limitations imposed by an authoritarian regime and international conditions create a dire situation for its citizens. Just as President el-Sisi referenced the Prophet Muhammad to highlight economic difficulties, the biblical plagues described in the Book of Exodus can also be evoked to illustrate Egypt's current plight. When Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine on February 24, 2022, the shockwaves were felt not only in Ukraine and Europe but also by an Egyptian official over 2,000 kilometers away, responsible for importing wheat into Egypt for his constituents. At the onset of the war, up to 70% of Egypt's wheat imports, a strategic commodity for the nation, came from Russia and Ukraine, now embroiled in conflict. It's important to note that Egypt is the world's largest importer of wheat. Immediately after the war began, wheat prices skyrocketed on global markets, increasing by up to 60%. For a country that relies on imports for over half of its food needs and whose cuisine heavily features aish baladi or national bread, this was alarming news. In an era of abundance, many may not recognize bread as a strategic commodity, but in Egypt, it undoubtedly is. Aish baladi is a cornerstone of Egyptian cuisine and culture, and its production is vital to the economy. The sheer volume of flour required to produce bread and other wheat products for Egypt's 114 million people cements its position as the world's largest wheat importer. Consequently, the price of aish baladi is a matter of national security. It's no surprise that aish baladi is subsidized. Up to 70% of Egyptians depend on this subsidized bread, a reliance that has persisted for decades. When President Anwar Sadat attempted to abolish the bread subsidy in 1977, it led to protests known as the bread riots. Some analysts also highlight the significance of bread during the Arab Spring in 2011. While authorities managed to keep bread prices stable, they failed to address the inefficiencies in the subsidy system. Long queues at bakeries angered the public and contributed to the discontent that eventually led to Hosni Mubarak's ouster. For these reasons, Al-Makari of the Arab Center asserts that Egypt's social contract is closely tied to the price of bread and, more broadly, to the availability and affordability of basic necessities. Meanwhile, prices in Egypt are soaring at unprecedented rates. Inflation reached 40% in September 2023 and has only slightly decreased to 32.5%. The situation is even grimmer when focusing on food prices, which hit 45% in March 2024. This comes after an alarming peak of over 70% a few months earlier. Consequently, Egypt's social contract is unraveling, ushering in a new phase of instability. However, this is just the tip of the iceberg for a nation beset by numerous other challenges. The literal plague reminiscent of biblical stories was the COVID-19 pandemic, which halted global human traffic. For Egypt, a country that relies on tourism for up to 50% of its economy, this was a devastating blow. Tourist numbers plummeted from over 13 million in 2019 to 3.2 million in 2020, causing a sudden 70% drop in revenue. Fortunately, post-pandemic, Egyptian tourism rebounded, reaching a record high of nearly 15 million visitors last year. This recovery would have been even more remarkable if not for the war that began on October 7th by Israel on the Gaza Strip, which borders Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. While this regional turmoil has not impacted Egypt's tourism sector as severely as COVID-19, it is influencing tourists' decisions and sentiments where everyone is expecting an expansion into a regional war. By 2024, Egypt faces stagnation or a likely decline in tourism. According to S&P Global Ratings, Egypt's tourism revenues are projected to drop by 10% to 30% compared to last year. This poses a significant issue, as the government's plan aims to double the number of tourists by 2028 and achieve a 20% annual growth in the sector. Regional unrest impacts tourism and another economic pillar, the Suez Canal. Built during British rule, the canal is a major revenue source for Egypt, demonstrating how geographic location can be leveraged for financial gain. However, the wars in Gaza and Yemen are directly affecting the Suez Canal. In February, the Egyptian president noted that tensions in the Red Sea have contributed to a 40% to 50% drop in Suez Canal profits, amounting to around $5 billion, given the canal's annual revenue of $10 billion. More recent figures from April indicate that canal traffic has decreased by 66% compared to April 2023. Worse still, regional unrest isn't limited to the eastern Red Sea. Egypt faces a significant challenge from another emerging regional power with a large population, Ethiopia. This time, the issue revolves around a river, not a canal or sea, the Nile. For over a decade, Ethiopia has been constructing the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, TS's largest infrastructure project ever, with the help of Israel. How ironic. While the new electricity sources are crucial for Ethiopia's growing population, now at 130 million, they pose a potentially severe threat to Egyptians living downstream. Egypt depends on the Nile's fresh water for up to 90% of its needs, including consumption, agriculture, and industry. The Blue Nile, which the Ethiopian dam harnesses, supplies up to 85% of the main riverbed. Cairo fears that the dam will disrupt the natural river system, causing significant losses, especially during the dry season. Despite over 10 years of dispute, the issue remains unresolved diplomatically. In this time, Ethiopia has nearly completed the dam's construction and filled the reservoir, an action Egypt has deemed illegal. Although negotiations have resumed, they have yielded no results. Consequently, Egypt's control over one of its most vital resources has diminished, and during droughts, the lack of fresh water for industry and agriculture looms ominously for Egyptians. But Egypt's problems don't stop there. 2018 marked a turning point for the country's mining sector, transitioning from a gas importer to a net exporter, thanks to the start of production from the Zohr offshore field. According to Italian oil giant Eni, which holds a 50% stake in the project, Zohr is the largest field discovered on the Mediterranean shelf. Production and exports grew steadily, peaking in 2022 when Egypt exported 8 million tons of LNG. However, 2023 saw a drastic 50% drop, and by May, Egypt had completely halted LNG exports. Regional instability is again to blame. Ship owners have been navigating alternate routes, such as taking longer voyages around the Cape of Good Hope. As a result, Egyptian exports have taken a hit, S&P Global analysts report. Additionally, after the Hamas war began, Israel temporarily halted production from the Tamar field, which supplied gas to Egyptian liquefaction facilities for re-export. Compounding these issues are problems at the Zohr field itself, where operators are struggling with leaks that allow water to enter. Consequently, a revenue stream that generated up to $8 billion in profits by 2022 has dried up. Complicating matters further is the situation of 2 million Palestinians cramped into the southern Gaza Strip, whom Israeli authorities might prefer to see dispersed into Egypt or other Arab countries. Egypt, dealing with its own mounting problems, is resistant to this idea. Given Cairo's challenges, this stance is understandable. So how are Egypt's ruling elites navigating these difficult times? Unfortunately, it appears that this too may be considered another Egyptian scourge. The Arab Spring brought a democratically chosen president, but then was followed by a coup that brought Sisi to power, and while some hoped for changes, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is following in the authoritarian footsteps of his predecessor, Hosni Mubarak. El-Sisi has already passed a third of Mubarak's 30-year reign and recently extended his own tenure. In the December general elections, he secured another 6-year term with a contentious 90% approval rating. However, this election had little to do with democratic processes. As Human Rights Watch notes, the campaign was marked by arrests of opposition members, intimidation, and candidate requirements that effectively prevented fair competition, not to mention bribing voters by distributing necessities. El-Sisi successfully silenced the growing popularity of Ahmed Tantawi, among others. El-Sisi is seeking a solution for Egypt's mounting economic problems, primarily through extensive borrowing from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, World Bank, and others that is considered by many to be counterproductive, especially the way these debts were spent. The issue is that in doing so, he has artificially propped up the Egyptian pound's exchange rate, boosting it against the US dollar and other currencies. This strategy, coupled with the lack of announced reforms and the bleak regional situation, has further dampened investor confidence. Nevertheless, the latest IMF loan tranche has compelled Cairo to let the currency loose, resulting in a dramatic drop from 7 Egyptians per dollar when he held office to 30 pounds per dollar in 2023, and as of 2024 sitting around 48 pounds per dollar on July 16. Despite this adjustment, Egypt's economic situation remains dire, with the country running out of hard currency. This predicament has creditors concerned about Egypt's solvency, though Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli assures that the country will meet all its obligations. Despite the severe economic conditions and successive crises, Egypt is pursuing ambitious infrastructure projects. El-Sisi, like many autocrats, aims to leave a tangible legacy, epitomized by the new capital city, one of his counterproductive projects. The new Cairo government district and the new capital city, currently under construction, is projected to cost a staggering $58 billion. Located 50 kilometers east of Cairo, towering skyscrapers are already rising from the desert landscape. This is not the only grand project El-Sisi envisions. Plans include a $25 billion nuclear power plant on the Mediterranean coast and a 2,000 kilometers high-speed rail network, estimated to eventually cost $23 billion. While new housing, electricity, and connectivity are crucial for Egypt's growing population, many argue that with 60% of the population living at or below the poverty line, the government's priorities are direly misplaced. But El-Sisi and his cabinet are not giving up. Even as the treasury begins to run out of borrowed money, it was announced in February that Egypt has sold its coastal city of Ras Al Hekma to the United Arab Emirates for $35 billion. Although the area will remain under Egyptian jurisdiction, and Egypt will receive a 35% stake in the project from the Emirates Investment Fund ADQ. The news sparked controversy in Egypt. Ras Al Hekma is regarded as Egypt's most beautiful beach with its white sand and turquoise waters. Given that tourism is Egypt's crown jewel, many view this sale as handing over the pearl of this crown to the Emirates. Some argue this is not the first instance of trading territory for hard currency under El-Sisi. In 2016, Egypt relinquished its rights to the islands of Tiran and Sanafar, recognizing Saudi Arabia's sovereignty over them. These islands are strategically located at the entrance to the Gulf of Aqaba, on the eastern side of the Sinai. This decision led to protests and widespread confusion among Egyptians. According to reports, this transaction was supposed to cost the Saudis $25 billion. Interestingly, shortly after announcing the recent project with the Emirates, it was reported that Cairo is preparing another deal to sell another resort on the Red Sea coast, close to the islands of Tiran and Sanafar, to the Saudis. This project is said to be worth $15 billion. It's no surprise that millions of Egyptians do not see their future in a country beset by economic troubles, a shortage of living space, and another autocrat whose actions exacerbate the situation to new heights. The pressure to emigrate is increasing, as many talents look for better opportunities abroad. The nearest prosperous destination is the Gulf or Europe. The Gulf is not the most welcoming to immigration, and the immigration sentiment in Europe has changed significantly over the past decade. Even Germany, once a strong supporter of mass immigration, is altering its policies. In response, the European Union is attempting to halt the migration flow with financial aid instead. In March, Brussels announced a €7.4 billion package for Egypt. This package aims to help Egypt get back on track and secure a future for its people. Yet, given El-Sisi's history, there's little evidence of the far-reaching reforms needed for long-term improvement. These reforms would have to begin with El-Sisi and the state's governance system, making the EU's move seem like throwing money at fire. Human Rights Watch labeled the deal a reward for Egypt's autocratic leader. Egypt continues to face new challenges. Perhaps the most significant is the construction of new government offices in the new government district. Ultimately, the real victims are the majority of the Egyptian people, whose population grows by nearly 2 million annually. As the country teeters on the brink of insolvency, the region is gripped by instability, the Nile's resources are dwindling, and living space is shrinking. Egypt is becoming a ticking time bomb. Abdul Fattah el-Sisi is trying to defuse it, but his actions increasingly resemble those of Hosni Mubarak. The question remains, will the outcome be the same? If you like this video, consider subscribing to Mind Polish for more in-depth discussions on topics ranging from politics and religion to science and more. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends. Until next time, stay curious.